Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well. Today I wanted to give a go at ranking all of the races from Baldur's Gate 3. Baldur's Gate 3 has many diverse and interesting races, all of which have varying levels of their own unique dialogue, traits, and overall narrative impact. Of course, there's not really any way to make an objective measure of all of the game's races, and this list is completely my own opinion, based mainly on the gameplay traits and role-playing aspect of each race. Honestly, you're free to disagree with my list, and I'd love to see all of your own unique lists down below. Also quickly, if you enjoy this type of content, please consider subbing to the channel and dropping a like, and without further ado, let's get right into it. At the very bottom of the list, at number 11, we have the Halflings. Now I know some people might have a bit of a soft spot for this small sized race, but to me they've always felt like the least exciting option you could choose as your race. Mechanically, these little guys are not terrible by any means. Their unique lucky trait, which allows you to reroll natural ones, is a genuinely useful perk that can save you in multiple of the game's clutch or die situations. And then when you combine that with their naturally high dexterity, it makes Halflings honestly a great choice when you're trying to make a build focused around being a nimble rogue or ranger. However, for me personally, I feel that almost anything that a Halfling can do, another race can do way better. When you compare Halflings to races like the Elves, Drow, or Tieflings, they don't really have that sort of wow factor that lures you to them. And I don't mean this just in terms of their natural appearance, but in the way that they lack the strong identity or flashy abilities like Misty Step that makes the other races just feel truly distinct. Even in terms of their narrative importance, Halflings don't exactly have much spotlight. There's no really major character within the game's story who's a Halfling, and unlike the Githyanki with their deep and rich lore, or Tieflings with great narrative importance in Act 1, Halflings just kind of exist. Furthermore, their unique dialogue options and meaningful distinct interactions with the world around them is one of the worst among all of the races, and it honestly just makes playing as one feel a bit underwhelming when you compare it to all the other choices that you've got. In terms of a purely cosmetic note, I also think that for most players, they're not really going to serve the fantasy of being a grand hero in this world. I see it more of a niche pick for role players who enjoy the sort of Hobbit style charm that Halflings bring, rather than the increased grandeur of something like a Githyanki. So overall, I don't think Halflings are a bad race at all, but they just don't really stack up well against the other races in this list. And when you've got races with more mechanical and narrative depth, Halflings just fall short for me. Now, humans in Baldur's Gate 3 are of course the most simple and generic option you could choose to play as. They are the most common of the races in Faerun, and while they're known in lore for their so-called tenacity and ambition, mechanically they don't bring anything major that can't be done as well or better by another race. Their unique racial trait is Civil Militia, which grants them proficiency with spears, pikes, halberds, and whatnot, which may sound good in theory, but honestly when playing the game, I found it mostly redundant. Many of the game's martial classes already have these sort of proficiencies built into their kits, and if you're picking a spellcaster, you often want a race that actually provides something more useful like a specific resistance. The truth really is that humans feel like the safe choice, the default race for players who just want to jump in without thinking too hard about what race and accompanying subrace to choose from. And to be fair, there's nothing wrong with that. I even played as one in my second playthrough of the game. In terms of a role-playing perspective, simply playing as a generic human adventurer in the Forgotten Realms will never feel out of touch, and I can definitely see the appeal in that. But of course, when you compare them to the more unique and diverse races in the game, humans don't really have any meaningful racial abilities or narrative impact that elevate them much further. Yes, many of the game's most important characters from Gale to Will are human, but then again, as humans are so common, their presence as humans don't exactly feel significant at all. In terms of unique dialogue, humans actually have the least of any race, and that makes a lot of sense. Where other races may be scorned or stared at, humans are the most common within Faerun, and so there's not really anything for other races to sneer at differently. Where other races make you actually feel like someone different, a sort of outcast. Playing as a human makes you just feel like another person in Faerun, and while that's completely fine, it's personally a little boring. I guess the best way to describe playing as humans in Baldur's Gate 3 is that they're just the vanilla ice cream. They're there if you want it and are familiar, but lack the spice or unique impact that other races bring, which is why they rank this low on the list for me. Going back to the trend of a smaller race, we've got the Gnomes. Now, Gnomes honestly do have a lot of role-playing charm and some genuinely useful mechanics, but again for me, they feel overshadowed compared to the more distinct races in the game. Again, let's start first from a mechanical value, which is where Gnomes do actually bring some real value to the table. One of the biggest racial perks that they have is Gnome Cunning, which gives advantage on all intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws against magic, pretty much in any stage of the game. This is an absolutely huge defensive trait, and makes gnomes surprisingly resilient against spellcasters who often cast spells around charming or frightening you. Furthermore, the various sub-races of gnomes also provide additional flavor in terms of their mechanical range. For example, rock gnomes gain a constitution boost and proficiency with tinkering, whereas deep gnomes come with an innate stealthiness and spells like Disguise Self, making them fantastic for stealth-oriented builds. Now, coming to a lore perspective, gnomes are known to be clever and curious, and we can see that firsthand with the inventions of the Iron Hand gnomes. They're honestly a great fit if you want to roleplay as a character who embodies that sense of wonder about the world around them, and this is reflected nicely in how NPCs interact and react to gnomes, from amusement to underestimation. Surprisingly enough, gnomes also have some of the most unique dialogue of any race, and this definitely does almost give them the edge over some of the other races in this list. But then again, these unique interactions and dialogue never truly feel as impactful as the prejudice or narrative way that races like the Drow or Githyanki often encounter. In retrospect of the giant world of Baldur's Gate 3, gnomes still do feel like a niche pick. They don't have the raw charisma of tieflings or the sheer mechanical dominance of the Githyanki, and although a gnome subrace like deep gnomes may be great for stealth builds, gnomes aren't too great at much else in terms of builds. Their small stature limits your weapon choices, and unless you're really leaning into the flavor of playing as a gnome, the other races just outshine them in terms of their versatility and customization. All that being said though, I of course do think gnomes have a distinct identity and unique mechanical advantages, but again, comparing them to the races that are higher on this list, they still fall flat for me personally. Dwarves in Baldur's Gate 3 are a race that on the surface may feel a little plain and generic compared to even some of the lower ranked races in this list, but they've actually got a lot going for them. Mechanically, dwarves are built around resilience and toughness, which makes them a great pick if you're looking for a race with great odds of survival throughout Faerun. Across all three of its unique sub-races, from gold dwarves to shield dwarves to Duraga, you'll find strong traits that will help you stay alive in tough situations. One of the highlights of dwarves, however, is the trait of dwarven resilience. Essentially, this provides them an advantage on saving throws against poison and resistance to poison damage overall. If this sounds like it could be a lifesaver in certain fights, well, it most certainly is, especially in fights where status effects can make all the difference between winning and losing. On top of that, one of their greatest racial traits for me personally is dark vision, which of course is always handy in the game's many darker and shadowy environments. Going further into the sub-races of the dwarves, this is really where most of their charm and unique role playability comes into play. Starting with the gold dwarves, they get an extra point of constitution, which makes them even tankier and great for frontline builds like fighters or barbarians. On the other hand, shield dwarves lean greatly into stats like strength and constitution, which gives them natural synergy with martial classes that thrive on both raw durability and damage output. Lastly, the most unique of the three sub-races, Duraga, brings a much darker edge to the equation with their unique abilities of enlarge and invisibility, making them surprisingly versatile for both melee brawlers and more tactical builds. However, where dwarves may shine in terms of the mechanical depth and diversity, they definitely fall flat in terms of overall role-playing nuance or narrative depth. Baldur's Gate 3 really doesn't give dwarves much unique dialogue outside their interactions in the Underdark, and they truly do lack any sort of greater narrative impact. It really feels like the people within Faerun should respond to the presence of dwarves almost in the same way they do as gnomes, but unfortunately it always feels like no one really reacts to you in any area of the game. Honestly, if Larian had nailed this aspect of dwarves, they'd easily sit much higher on the list. Still, even without much narrative spotlight or unique dialogue, dwarves still remain a rock solid and dependable choice for any new playthrough. Now, half-orcs for me are one of the more fascinating races in the entire game. Their stature is towering and muscular, and they are seemingly born with a natural inclination for physical dominance, making them fit seamlessly into any damage dealer build in Baldur's Gate 3. What sets them apart mechanically is their unique racial feature of relentless endurance. Essentially, once per long rest, if you're reduced to 0 HP, you drop to 1 instead, so it's basically a last-ditch saving grace. It's a simple ability, but one that has the potential to save you many times across the game, and it definitely makes half-orcs a great option for those of you who want to take greater risks within melee combat. In addition to this, half-orcs also have another feature called Savage Attacks, which will allow you to roll an extra damage die when you land a critical hit. This, combined with the earlier racial feature of Relentless Endurance, makes building out melee-based characters with half-orcs an absolute dream. Classes like Barbarians and Paladins already have critical attacks which are devastating, and so pairing this with the extra damage roll of a die, you've got the ability to create some of the most powerful builds in the entire game with ease. Of course, it's also noteworthy to mention they also have the racial feature of Dark Vision, which is always a nice quality of life feature for exploration and combat in darker environments like the Shadow Coast lands. Despite all this praise, you may have noticed that half-orcs don't exactly rank very high on this list. And that's just because although they have great mechanical depth and unique racial features, they lack just as much as halflings in terms of narrative impact and unique dialogue. It's honestly a shame because the very few half-orc characters you see in the game, like Disciple Zrel, have a sheer presence that lends to the strong personality of half-orcs as a whole. Other than that, there's really no other major half-orc characters within the story, and the game doesn't highlight them to the level you'd expect from the usual D&D story. Honestly, I think it would have been great if they were integrated into the ranks of the Goblin Camp in Act 1, as they would have fit in nicely with the Absolute's forces, but unfortunately this role was taken by the Goblins. And then when we look at how the world and its characters respond to your race, half-orcs sadly don't get much attention at all. So although they may be great in combat and embody the fantasy of an unstoppable warrior, they simply don't bring the unique dialogue variety or narrative depth that characterizes the higher ranked races on this list. The Dragonborn race is definitely one of the most striking races you can pick in Baldur's Gate 3, and their appeal is quite obvious from just a glance. They're these towering, draconic humanoids with a presence unlike any other race, and they bring an immediate sense of that fantasy flair into your party. But even throwing looks aside, their mechanics also give them a solid ranking in this list. The defining racial feature for the Dragonborn race is of course Breath Weapon. Essentially, depending on your chosen ancestry, you'll gain a unique attack tied to the game's specific elemental damage types like fire, acid or frost. This ability can be used at any time and recharges simply with a short rest, hence giving Dragonborn characters an AoE tool that'll allow you to clear weaker mobs fast or soften up stronger groups before your party goes ham. Now, this ability is not going to replace the damage output of a full dedicated caster, but for martial based builds, having access to a reliable elemental attack that can harm several enemies in one blow is a great tool to have. On top of this, Dragonborn characters also gain resistance to their chosen ancestry's damage type. So for example, if you chose a red Dragonborn, you'll gain resistance to fire attacks. Although the utility of this specific feature isn't exactly significant, that extra resistance will often come in handy even if it's just in 1 or 2 fights throughout the entire game. Now, moving to some discussion on their narrative integration, the Dragonborn race feels like it falls right in the middle of the road. You'll definitely get some unique dialogue throughout the game, and being of a race that is quite rare in Faerun definitely makes you stand out, providing the race with a great role-playing flair that not many other races in the game have. And I know this is cheating because the Dark Urge can be any race, but playing as a Dragonborn Dark Urge just feels innately right, and to me is the most definitive way you can play as a Dragonborn character in the game. However, unlike some of the top ranked races in this list, they still lack the narrative depth and reactivity which define the very top races on my list. Overall though, it's just hard to beat the unique visual design of a Dragonborn, and this combined with their interesting mechanical features makes them one of the most stylish and effective races on this list. Now, entering the top 5, we kick it off with the Half-Elves, who strike a strong balance between overall narrative appeal and mechanical flexibility. They're of course a mix between humans and elves, and in many ways they inherit the best of both worlds. From a mechanical standpoint, Half-Elves are one of the most versatile among this list. Thanks to their unique racial feature of Fey ancestry, they gain advantages on saving throws against being charmed and can't be magically put to sleep, which is an ability you'll surprisingly encounter quite a few times. In addition, like some of the other races in this list, they've also got Dark Vision, which again, to reiterate, is always a genuinely useful tool that helps you navigate across the game's dungeons and more gloomy settings. However, where I think the real mechanical strength of Half-Elves comes into play is their flexibility when it comes to ability scores. Unlike pure elves who lean heavily into dexterity, or humans who sit at a more generic starting point, Half-Elves can distribute their points into multiple stats, making them a viable option for almost any sort of class build in the game. I'm talking from whether you're building a martial fighter, a bard, or even a warlock. Half-Elves just have the versatility to literally fit with any class that you throw at it. Narratively speaking, Half-Elves don't actually have a ton of unique dialogue, and other than humans, they may even have the least in the entire game. However, it's the fact that many important characters in the game like Shadowheart and Ketheric are half-elf that makes them still remain compelling. But more so than that, what really benefits them is their overall roleplay ability. As they carry a sense of dual identity, they're often caught between the human and elven world, while never fully belonging to either. And although the game never directly gives you a quest or tons of unique dialogue to reflect this notion, when characters like Shadowheart mention it in conversation, it adds a layer of depth to your character that not many of the other races lower on this list can attest to. Ultimately, I find the greatest strength of this race is their flexibility. Yes, they definitely don't feel as exotic as the Tieflings or as interesting as the Githyanki, but their mechanical strength and immense role-playing potential ensure that choosing them never feels like a bad choice. Following on from half-elves, directly after we've got the elves themselves. Elves always hold a special place in fantasy stories for me, and Baldur's Gate 3 definitely does them plenty of justice. Both mechanically and narratively, elves strike an excellent balance between strong utility, great role playability, and a long-standing connection to Faerun's long history. From the moment that you choose an elf, you're role-playing into one of the most classic archetypes within the fantasy genre, but this choice never feels like a generic one. Instead, through their versatility and overall place within Faerun, elves often feel like one of the most rewarding races that you can choose in the game. All elves share a baseline package in terms of mechanics that's already pretty great. Much like half-elves, they've got dark vision for low-light exploration and an incredibly useful racial feature of Fey ancestry, which, as I mentioned earlier, gives them advantages on saving throws against being charmed and immunity to magical sleep. To add on to that, they've also got a proficiency in perception, which when paired with dark vision makes them a great race to choose when it comes to exploring. But where I personally think they shine the most is in their sub-race options. Starting with the High Elves, they gain a free cantrip of your choice, which obviously adds a huge level of flexibility to your build crafting within the game. Wood Elves, on the other hand, lean more into speed and stealth, with faster movement and proficiency in stealth, which makes them perfectly synergize with building stealth-oriented rogue or ranger characters. Again, returning to their narrative impact, much like half-elves, they don't exactly get too much. However, just like half-elves, there are major characters such as Astarion and Halsin who are of the elf race, which adds to the overall fantasy of playing as this race. Much of the same praise that I gave for the role playability of half-elves plays into factor here as well. This is because elves are just innately one of the most important and common races in all of Faerun, which makes playing as them an absolutely great and flexible choice for any playthrough. Overall, although they may lack the unique narrative elements that elevate the races higher up this list, elves remain one of the most flexible, thematically rich, and consistently strong races in all of Baldur's Gate 3. Now entering the top 3 races on my list, we've got the Tieflings. The Tieflings are definitely one of the more distinctive races in Baldur's Gate 3, and I think they strike a brilliant balance between mechanical depth and narrative flavor. Starting with some discussion of Tieflings mechanically, they honestly bring a lot to the table. It seems to be a running theme with some of the higher ranked races on this list, but Tieflings also have the racial feature of dark vision, which, as I've mentioned a few times now, is great for exploration in the game's more dingy areas. They've also got the feature of hellish resistance, which gives them a level of resistance to fire damage, which is of course one of the most common damage types in the entire game. That alone adds to the survivability of Tieflings greatly across a wide range of builds. But again, where I find Tieflings most interesting is the unique differences in mechanics between their sub-races. I won't go into them one by one, but using the example of Asmodeus Tieflings, they gain Thaumaturgy and later access to abilities like Hellish Rebuke and Darkness, which just works perfectly with Warlock and Sorcerer builds. This same sort of versatility and flexibility is also seen with the other 2 sub-races for Tieflings, Mephistopheles Tieflings and Zerial Tieflings, which is one of the major reasons that I find them one of the most fascinating races in the game. Now, coming onto their narrative importance, this will become abundantly clear from the very start of the game. As soon as you land and find the Emerald Grove, you'll be introduced to the plight of the Tiefling refugees camped there, which instantly provides them with a strong emotional and narrative presence that many other races in the game just don't have. Almost more than any other race, I honestly feel like the story of Tieflings as a whole is truly baked into the world, and playing as one often adds an extra layer of weight to these story encounters. That's without mentioning the considerable amount of unique dialogue that Tieflings have, which just makes role-playing as one just that much more rewarding. Ultimately, Tieflings are without question one of the most versatile and narratively rich races in Baldur's Gate 3, and that combination of mechanical depth and emotional resonance is exactly why they've earned such a high place on this list. Coming to our number 2 spot, we've got the Drow race. Now, if there's any race that carries an immediate aura of danger and intrigue, it's definitely them. Descended from the elves but twisted by their devotion to the spider goddess, the Drow are instantly recognizable with their obsidian skin, white hair and crimson eyes. From a purely lore standpoint, the Drow are for sure one of the most iconic races in all of Dungeons & Dragons, and Larian did an absolutely incredible job in making sure they were just as compelling here. Mechanically, the Drow share many of the core racial benefits of their elven kin, like Fey ancestry and proficiency in perception. However, they stand apart in their superior dark vision perk, which doubles the range of the normal dark vision trait, making them definitely unmatched in navigating the various pitch black areas of Faerun. In addition to that, the Drow also gain a unique trait called Drow Weapon Training, which expands their proficiencies to include weapons like short swords and hand crossbows, making them feel like natural rogues or dexterity-based fighters. But honestly, the real substance of the drow comes in how they're perceived in the world of Faerun. There's not very many drow characters in the game, and so choosing to play as one will immediately feel interesting. Drows have some of the most unique dialogue and interactions with NPCs, as other characters often see you with a level of suspicion or outright hostility that the other races just aren't characterized by. Most characters in this game rightfully associate the drow race with cruelty and bloodshed, and this is reflected greatly in how the world reacts and responds to you. This built-in prejudice from the very start of the game makes role-playing as a drow feel especially rewarding, as you can define your character by either leaning into the stereotypes of a drow or pushing against it to become something else entirely. Going back to the unique dialogue for a second, this is especially prominent in Act 1 of the game, in the Goblin Camp, as you honestly have some of the most unique dialogue interactions of any race just in this small area. Overall, the drow for me sit in that rare sweet spot where they're versatile enough to excel mechanically for almost any build, yet loaded with the cultural baggage and narrative weight that makes every playthrough feel distinct. And personally, it's that blend of mechanical strength, role playability, and deep lore roots that makes playing as a drow just such an easy and rewarding choice. Rounding off this list, in the number 1 spot, we of course have the Githyanki. Out of every race in Baldur's Gate 3, I personally think that the Githyanki are the ones that feel the most mechanically unique, narratively impactful, and downright fun to roleplay. Starting with the race mechanically, they immediately stand apart from any other race in the game. The most unique of all of their traits is that of astral knowledge. Essentially, this ability will allow you to temporarily gain proficiency in all skills tied to one ability score, which is honestly a ridiculously flexible feature that gives you utility in almost any party setup. Even beyond that, the psionics abilities of Githyanki provide them with spells like Mage Hand and Misty Step, all without consuming any spell slots at all. Obviously, these are extremely powerful and useful tools in both exploration and combat, and they provide Githyanki characters an edge from the very start of the game all the way till its very final boss fight. The amount of times I've used Misty Step is honestly too much to count, and the utility of just having it as an ability that you unlock as a racial feature just can't be understated in any way. But of course, while all of that may be incredible, it's really the unique dialogue, reactivity, and narrative impact of the Githyanki race that gives it enough weight to soar above every other race in the game for me. From the very first moment of the game, NPCs in the game will react to your race as a Githyanki, and they don't simply see you as just another wandering adventurer. Instead, you're someone with a history, a baggage, and a reputation that is so innately connected to the militaristic society and world that the Githyanki people are raised in. Furthermore, the way in which the race is naturally tied to the larger story of Baldur's Gate 3 is absolutely incredible. Of course, the greatest example of this is Lae'zel herself. A quest like hers highlights the rigid culture and devotion to Vlaakith that all Githyanki can resonate with, and playing as one makes you constantly feel those cultural expectations weighing on you. Playing as a Githyanki for sure makes roleplay choices much richer, the narrative more dynamic, and most importantly, makes your character's identity inseparable from the game's larger themes of freedom, faith, and control. Overall, I really do think that in pretty much every single way that matters, the Githyanki are truly the ultimate race to play in Baldur's Gate 3, which makes them without a doubt my number 1 spot. And with all that said, that sums up my personal ranking of the races in Baldur's Gate 3. I really did enjoy making this video, and I would love to hear what your personal rankings are down below. It definitely was an interesting one to make, as I did try to balance my personal opinion with what actually seems like the most impactful races in the game. And honestly, I do think that every race adds their own unique flavor to the game. But anyway, that's all from me for today's video. If you did enjoy it, please consider subbing to the channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 and RPG content, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.